Hi, Sharon Chin again. We're heading down to the end of the rooster. The next step is to fill in this oval gray background behind the rooster. And I'm sorry I forgot to zoom out on the camera, but I mixed up a gray using the burnt umber and some ultramarine blue, and you can add some of the beige. And I'm going to keep this darker around the edges and just start filling in this background. Initially, I'm just going to kind of do an overall gray, lighten it a little as I get to the edge of the rooster by adding more beige to this mix. And then we'll add some accent colors. So I'm just using a large round brush to kind of scrub this in. Here I'm adding a little more beige to the mix to lighten it up. You just want some variation in this color. You don't want it just to be an even, flat value. And I'm going to, as we move along, deviate from the photograph, the reference photograph a little bit because I want to emphasize some of the edges. So on the edges of the rooster where he is darker, I want the color in the background to be a little lighter, and in areas that are lighter, like around the yellow beak, I want the background to go darker so that pops that beak out. As you're working this wet on wet, if your texture's a little too much, just take a mop brush and start tapping that, and that'll soften the transition from your values. So again, I'm just doing this gray mixture from using the burnt umber and some of the ultramarine blue. If you add more burnt umber to the mix, it'll go browner. If you add a little more of the blue, of course, it'll go bluer. But here I'm putting in a little bit more of the brown and picking up a little bit of black to darken this around the beak. The beak's very light, and if we went with that lighter beige color, it's not going to stand out very much. So just darken around this edge, and it'll make that front stand out a lot more. And then as I'm working up, just softening that color back into the lighter gray that we had. Now here in the front of the chest, I want to go a lot lighter, so I'm using a lot of the beige, just picking it up in my dirty brush. And you can see how that light edge of beige against the dark brown feathers of the chest make that chest stand out a lot more. So here, just keep lightening with more beige. And we'll just transition that by blending it up into the grays, that darker grays that we had above. But then here on the edge, I'm going to add a little bit more of the blue color, just to give some variation to this background. Pick up a little burnt sienna. And you can see how you can just change the backgrounds to suit. You know, I like this blue and burnt sienna down here because it kind of picks up those lavender tones that are reflected in the rooster's feathers and on his comb and wattle. And the mop brush, you can just kind of tap that in, and as long as your paint's not dry, you can kind of softly blend it back together. So pick up a little darker value using the blue and a little bit of the burnt umber again, but more blue to keep these lavender tones and darkening the oval edge. And I'm coming right out to the tracing line on that oval. And I'm going to add some of this purple color now back up to the top right of the oval. I like that purple's in there, so we're going to start adding a little bit of accent colors. And again, I've got some water in my brush, so this paint's pretty loose, and that lets me kind of tap and soften it into the background that's already started to dry. But you can see where those lavender tones in the background really pull those highlights out of the rooster that are those lavender tones. Just clean up, with a wet brush, you can clean up any edges that are still wet, just, with water in your brush. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference because we're going to paint over this with some burnt sienna. Now that I've got the background in, I decided I need to go back and add just a little bit stronger highlights into the rooster's chest. Again, picking up these lavender tones. Your fingers make really good little softening tools. Kind of tap the white or wet paint in, and then just touch them with your fingers to soften it down. Again, I'm pulling these strokes on the rooster sort of in kind of the direction of the feather growth. And once you get the background in, sometimes I'll see things that I want to reinforce a little bit. So I'm going to go in and put some more of this red color into or actually it's sort of under the feather ruff around the rooster's neck. So I'm just using an angle brush and sort of a little bit of a float, just trying to emphasize the divisions among these feathers. So on this back side, we're using the darker value, which is the ultramarine blue and burnt umber, and towards the front of the feathers I was started with the burnt sienna. Now I'm going to soften that edge, just using my wet brush just to kind of blend that up into the feathers. Then let's add a little darker shadow here under that white thing on the side of the rooster's face under his eye. I'm just going to float a little bit of burnt umber underneath that to strengthen that shadow again. At this point, we're just refining. Down here where it's darker, I'm doing the burnt umber and a little bit of the ultramarine blue to make it a darker, almost blackish color. And with a more just wet brush, kind of just soften those and pull some little bit of streaks. I'm going to pick up a little of the yellow again and just go over some of the highlights in the feathers. I'm just streaking this in using the chisel edge of the brush. We just want to just redefine some of these highlights a little bit. And adding some of these little erratic feathers here at the back that are sticking in various directions. They just kind of got lost a couple times when we were defining shadows. In this stage, I'm just kind of jumping back and forth between adjusting my highlights and adding back in a few shadows. So I'm, just using the same colors that we originally used. I'm just, continually referring back to the reference photo to see where I need to adjust things. Okay, back to the background. I'm going to add some green down here in this lower left, and I've made that by mixing the blue and some yellow. You can also create a green by mixing black and yellow, so just pick one that you like. And so I'm brushing this on the bottom corner, and now I'm going to just kind of walk that color out and soften it back into that gray that we originally put down. You can see in our reference photo there was some green down in this bottom left. I'm going to make a little bit more blue in here just to brighten that green up a little bit. And again, we're, kind of keeping our lavender tones that we have in the rooster. And this paint's fairly wet, so you can take your mop brush now and tap it in to blend it into that gray background. And the screen tone also kind of picks up the yellows that are in the rooster's feather ruff around his neck. Let's darken the shading here at the top right of the oval. And I'm, again, adding some slightly green, but this is more blue in there. And my paint is fairly wet so that we can kind of brush it again back into that gray. So brush it in, then tap it with a mop brush and soften it into your undercoat. So you see we have just a slight little tinge of green in there. We're mostly blue. We're going to add some blue floated color down here around the rooster's wattle. Again, just to darken along that edge where it's highlighted. So clean your brush and then just soften that out into the gray. And then tap with your mop brush to smooth it out a little. Now I feel like it's a little too dark right here in front of the chest, so I'm going to go back in and put some of that beige back in here. So I've got it side loaded on an angle brush, just pulling it down along the front there and now softening it back into the gray background. Just wipe your brush and then tap with a mop brush to soften it more. Just going to highlight a little bit more on that front edge of that comb. Again, with it, we're using that beige that we had on the brush. So at this stage, it's a lot of going back and forth, darkening dark, lightening light. So Some of it'll just be to your taste. If you like something different than I've done, you can adjust it to something that you prefer. I think back here along the ruff on the back of the neck, I'd like to add a little more purple because purple again is the complement of yellow. They're opposite each other on the color wheel. So by adding a little purple along this edge, it'll make those yellow feathers pop out a little bit more. Complements tend to make each other look brighter. So again, the same way we're kind of side loading it in there and then walking the color out and softening it back into that gray background. I don't have a whole lot of paint on my brush. I'm going to darken this a little bit, a little darker purple. So I've put in some purple is a mix of the ultramarine blue and the red, but I added a little bit more burnt sienna into it just then to dull it down just a touch. This area down here, I see a little bit of a hard line, so I'm going to brush a little bit of this purple into here and soften that transition a little bit. And pull this purple in around the comb a little bit more. Here, this background kind of just needs to be darkened a little bit around the top edge of this comb. Sort of when you're painting the background in around your foreground painting, you have to sort of merge these two together a little bit. Now that our background's done, we're going to paint this border in around the rooster using a number 4 flat brush, which is about the width of this band, and burnt sienna paint. And you're just going to fill in that border around the whole oval. You're just loading your brush, add a little water to your paint, and try to pull just smooth strokes about 2 to 3 inches long, maintaining an even pressure on your brush. After I go around one whole circuit around the edge, if it looks like it needs it, I'll go back and go over it with a second coat. So this ends this video, and in the next one we'll do the lettering.